Welcome to the Student Ministry Podcast. This is episode 80 of the Student Ministry Podcast. My name is Steve Cullum, and today we're going to have a conversation around youth pastor compensation with Dan Navarra. Dan's actually been on the podcast a couple times before. The first time we talked about youth pastor compensation with Dan was on episode 38 back in 2019, and lots of things have changed. And so we're going to have kind of revisit that conversation here 3 years later with Dan and see what's changed, see from all his research and gatherings from a lot of different youth pastors and youth workers across the country. He's been gathering information and has some great results to share with you and some encouragements as well. So if you've had questions around salary and anything to do with compensation, today is the day you want to take some notes and make sure you check out all Dan's research. He was also on episode 65 with the co-founder of Chemistry Staffing, Matt Steen. So if you have any questions around church staffing in general, 65 is one to also check out. But today we're going to talk to Dan about all things youth pastor compensation. So like I said, I hope you're ready to take some notes and also follow up with Dan on all his research. But before we jump into that, I want to encourage you to make sure you are following us on social media. Make sure you are subscribed. Make sure you're sharing with other youth workers out there who need to hear these conversations. That's just a huge thing for us. And if you like what you hear, be sure to leave a positive review on your favorite podcast app. Also, before we jump into this conversation, we need to thank the sponsor of this episode of the Student Ministry Podcast. G-Shades is a youth ministry curriculum and teaching strategy focused on helping students see every life situation through the lens of the gospel. There's several options to fit everyone with 3 plans to choose from. This curriculum gives you the resources that you need to do what you do better. Do you need message outlines, a discussion guide, and a game? That's just $16 a month. If you're looking for a higher production value, including bumper videos, Instagram devotionals, and parent guides, that's $25 a month. And do you want an affordable youth ministry video curriculum that can help you increase your online reach during this pandemic? G-Shades has you covered for $36 a month. You will not find a better youth ministry video curriculum at that price point anywhere. G-Shades really sets itself apart by helping students see the gospel applies to every life situation that is out there. And if you want to find out more about Mike Haynes, the founder of G-Shades, you can check out episodes 32 and 55 of the Student Ministry Podcast. So go ahead and head over to gshades.org to download Season 3 of G-Shades Youth Ministry Curriculum. And be sure to use the promo code TSMPOD for the Student Ministry Podcast at checkout to get an extra 10% off. gshades.org and use the promo code TSMPOD. G-Shades, seeing life through the lens of the gospel. You can find the link for G-Shades in the podcast show notes. Thanks so much, G-Shades, for sponsoring this episode of the Student Ministry Podcast. All right, now it's time to jump into this conversation with Dan Navarra as we talk about youth pastor compensation and also a little about his newest role at National Christian Foundation. Well, Dan, thanks so much for being back on the podcast today.
It is so good to be back with you guys. I'm excited to talk to you, Steve, about everything we got going on this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So some people have been listening to the podcast for a while, and they know a little bit about your story from previous episodes that you've been on. But for those that are brand new, or maybe you can catch us up on some of the new things that have been happening in your life over the last several months or years.
Yeah. So for the last 15 years, I've been in vocational full-time ministry, mostly with students, and kind of done that for a while. And then the pandemic hit, and I left my church in December of 2020. I, at the same time, have been working with Chemistry Staffing as a church coach, which is a fancy way of saying that we help churches hire people. We're a headhunting organization. And then I've also been doing some writing for Christianity Today. I contribute to church law and tax and church salary. So I write for this for subscription in this area of compensation and taxes and things like that. And what I've kind of done in the last year or so is kind of taken a hard look at ministry and where my gifting and my passions lie. And I found a way to do ministry with an organization. It's not a church. I'm now the newest area director for National Christian Foundation in California. We're a nationwide company, but I'm part of the California chapter, and I'm the Central Valley area director now for them. And what that means is I get to help wealthy, generous Christians be more generous. Our company helps people with tax leveraged and tax efficient giving solutions. And it's right up my alley of helping people be generous for the kingdom of God so that, Steve, you as a youth pastor don't ever have to sit in a staff meeting ever again and go, man, this is a great idea, but we ain't got no money for it. So my goal is to solve that problem for churches. And I'm excited about that. I'm going to keep doing the chemistry staffing thing. I'm going to keep doing the Christianity Today thing. Those are kind of side hustles for me. And therefore the survey will not go away this year. I will be doing the survey again this year. And I'm excited to talk about it.
That's cool. Yeah, our church is right in the middle of our budgeting process, and the whole time through it, I'm like, well, I hope we have the money for all these things I'm hoping to do and everything. So yeah, it's people like you in this new organization that you're with it's really, really exciting. Probably not a whole lot that, the typical youth pastor is not going to fall into your category of a wealthy Christian. There's probably some exceptions out there, but but most of us are not there. So how can, as a youth pastor, what's some ways for us to benefit from what you're going to be doing?
Yeah, I think the largest thing, so I work with the donors like significantly more, like 95% of the time I'll be working with donors, meaning people from your congregation. Mm-hmm. I won't be working with ministries or people who benefit from ministries specifically. My job is to get dollars from donors into ministries' hands, and NCF, National Christian Foundation, is the vehicle with which we do that. Where I will be able to help certain people who might be listening to this podcast is if you have like parents who own a business and they're selling off their business and they're going to transfer, or maybe you're going to buy into the business or something like that. Or you have people from your congregation who have what we call complex assets that they're trying to liquidate. We can help them make those liquidations less painful on the tax side of things so that they're not paying all these long-term capital gains taxes or significantly less numbers of that. So, if you're selling off a rental property or your parents are selling off a rental property and they don't want to give it all to the government, they want to give it to a ministry or the local church or, Young Life or whatever, we can help facilitate those difficult transfers of wealth. And so, I would always be willing to talk to any of your listeners who think that might be helpful for them.
Cool. And speaking of talking to listeners, I feel like, I need to actually create an actual bat signal, because I think every time I see some people asking questions in some of the youth ministry groups I'm in, I just like pop that bat signal up and tag Dan in it. And like, Dan is an expert in all things compensation, all things taxes and all that stuff for ministries. So did you ever foresee yourself, like when you're starting on a ministry, going this direction? Has the finance side of things always been a passion, or is that kind of a growing thing?
You know what it grew out of? It grew out of me watching churches struggle to not only pay their employees, but they weren't paying attention to what I call dashboard lights on their, you're driving down the road and your air pressure light comes on. It's like ignoring it. And so churches will be going year to year on ministry and they're like, giving's down 3%, no big deal. Well, no, that's a dashboard light. It might mean it's not a big deal today, but if you don't put air in your tire, eventually it's going to jack your rim up, or you're going to wear the tire down funky, or your gas mileage is going to go down, or you're going to get in a car accident, right? And so I watched churches struggle with dashboard lights and how to talk about them in a way that is healthy and transparent and that doesn't, over disclose personal information, but also recognizes like, hey, like, especially in my state, man, minimum wage has gone up $5 an hour in the last 5 years. Like, we have to be talking about what people make otherwise, or what they don't make. Otherwise, you're just going to end up in a car accident, financially, so to speak. And so that watching churches struggle with this is what led me to care about it. And I've always had a natural, I guess I would say, eye towards efficiency and wanting to eliminate waste and things like that. And so like I could look at a church budget, maybe it's say it's a $2 million church budget, and I can go, well, here's some creative ways to chop some money here and save some money here, because we need that money over here for personnel, quote unquote, or whatever the needs are. So that's always been something that I've had a knack for. And my passion grew for it because I realized a lot of people weren't comfortable even having the conversations. Because there's a stigma. I mean, you get this, man, as a youth pastor, there's a stigma. If you're going to go ask for $1,000 for something that's not on the budget, it better be worth it, right? We've been trained to find it for free or don't ask. And so, and that's not how the real world operates, right? The real world is like, we can raise costs, or we
Mm-hmm.
can trim back payroll, or we can not, if I'm a restaurant, I can raise prices. And so it's just a different economy within the kingdom of God, quote unquote, where God owns a cattle on 1,000 hills, and wherever our heart is, or wherever our treasure is, there our heart is also. We've got this weird economy that we've built of it better be really important if you need the money, because it's God's money. And the reality is, no. It doesn't have to be that simple and dictated.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. I think of it. Yeah. Just as you mentioned that, it was like, yeah, I'm thinking about, I got to pitch, this idea that like, I want to build a really nice Gaga pit outside of our church so that we can have a great, experience there, but it's not going to be cheap. I'm like, how do I pitch this in the right way? Because, this could mean, all those different things, and you have to pitch it the right way and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a very real thing for us. For sure.
Totally.
So you've been doing this youth pastor compensation report and survey for how long now?
This is year 5.
Year 5.
Can you believe it, man? 5 years ago, I walked into my boss's office and I was like, I need a raise. And he's like, prove it. And I put a Google form up in the Download Youth Ministry Facebook group and had 800 people fill it out in a 24-hour time period. And I was like, oh, I touched a button. Yeah. And so I formalized it, and I started publishing it with the Youth Cartel back then. Mark Ostreicher's been a friend and an encouragement and an editor on this project now for 5 years. And now we've brought it under the chemistry staffing umbrella as part of my work that I do with them. And I've incorporated Aaron Hill from Christianity Today as well as an advisor and analyst on it. And it's like, I'm really proud of what we put together this year. It's the most robust, comprehensive survey I've ever done. Not the most people that I've ever surveyed, but we're almost 5,000 words on this year's survey, which is like twice as long as last year's analysis was.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It's free.
Yeah, absolutely. And just looking through, I mean, just from my perspective, yeah, this is the most professional it's looked as well. It's like the report at the end, it was like, man, this is legit now. Like,
I'll pass that along to our team. I had no say in the design work. So there you go.
That's pretty cool. So we've talked in the past a few different times on this podcast around the report and what you're seeing, the trends and all that sort of thing. So I'd love to just kind of walk through some of the highlights this year. Like you said, people can grab that for free and read the entire thing. And hopefully, I know your goal with that is really to put those tools in people's hands, just like they were in your hands, so that you can actually go and have those conversations that need to take place.
Yeah, it gives people a leg to stand on, rather than saying, hey, I think I need a raise, or I think I deserve a raise, or how do I even like broach that? This is like the starting spot of being able to walk into your boss's office with a stack of paper that actually kind of gives a compelling case without you having to really open your mouth a lot. Yeah. So let's walk through a couple things. Sure. The first big idea, the average salary for a youth pastor in 2021 was $50,261. We finally cracked 50,000 as a national average. Woohoo! It is only a 1% increase over the year prior. And the average salary has risen every single year I've done the salary, which is good news, right? Mm-hmm. It's not staying static. But what I will say is, unlike 2 years ago, where the increase was similar to the cost of living national number, this year we did a little deeper dive into inflation, because everybody's feeling that. Mm-hmm. Gas, the price of an In-N-Out burger out here on the West Coast is going up. Yeah, no. I know, but it's still the best though. It's fine. It's worth it. But you just have to ride your bike to go get the In-N-Out burger instead of taking your car so that you can afford it. But so the national inflation numbers were a little bit staggering. They are anywhere from 4.6 to 6.1%, depending on what sector you look at this last year. So think like this. Let's just take an average of, we'll say 5% is the inflation number, meaning like the cost of milk went up 5%. The cost of gas went up 5%. These are everyday items that people buy. That's a really high number of inflation, and everybody would agree with that. But youth pastor salaries only went up 1%. And so what that tells you is, what it feels like is, even though you got a raise, you really got a 4% pay cut, is what it feels like. Like your cell phone bill might have gone up, or your cost of cable or electricity. And some people are like, they're getting a pit in their stomach right now going, oh my gosh, I got a 2% raise this year and thought I was stoked. Right. They're giving me an extra couple $100 a month. And actually your life cost on average went up more than that. So That's the first year that the numbers have been that disappointing in terms of raises for youth pastors and how they relate to the national numbers for cost of living increase and inflation. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. And are you thinking that, like, I know you don't really dive too deep into like the reasons behind it, but kind of speculate a little bit, like why do you think that is the case? Is it just because giving is down, like churches just can't afford to give those raises, or what do you think?
So I've written extensively about this, both for chemistry and for church law and tax and church salary. I don't think it's because giving is down, because frankly, charitable giving is not down in 2021. Now, I'm recording this in March of 2022, and I wrote an article last fall that gave some dashboard lights, to use that term again, to pay attention to. Because a lot of people, what happened was COVID hit and all this bailout money came into people, whether they wanted it or not. A lot of people who had wealth, they actually stepped up their giving in the pandemic because they knew that other people were going to lose jobs and things like that. The church I worked at the time, I mean, we had somebody come in and write a large check the week that the world shut down and just said, here, we think you're going to need it.
Wow.
And they did. But what it did was it skewed the giving overall for the church. And that's a dashboard like that some people aren't paying attention to in their churches. And so I said things like this. A lot of churches depend on end of year giving to meet their budget goals, like December giving. And I said, if your end of year giving is down more than 5 to 10% of what it was in 2018 or 19, look at that as a telling sign that you're going to struggle in the first quarter of the next year. And I saw some churches, I saw a church just a couple of weeks ago who said, we're actually down 20% in year-to-date giving this calendar year.
Wow.
And so what's happening is there was a really large delay in the giving drop. And everybody saw that coming, right? There was like nobody lost their job the week that the world shut down. Well, a few people did, but for the most part, everybody kind of was like furloughed or we don't know what to do. Don't come to work. We'll keep paying you. Right. And, I'm not talking about the restaurant worker. I'm talking about the person who's got a salaried role, teachers, even like none of them were furloughed. They were all paid. Right. Police officers were paid. Everybody was paid still. And so now all of a sudden you're seeing economies be really affected by the lack of support, or the support that we were living off of is disappearing. And you're just seeing the effects of it kind of have a delay. They call it delay wave. And so I think in 2022, you're going to see giving really go down as the economy reopens and people go, oh, I need to like out in California, my wife and I own a small business and our costs have gone like the cost. We own a cheese and meat shop and the cost of cheddar cheese doubled in the last 12 months. We can't pass that cost along to our clients. They won't show up. And so we're taking a loss in profit is what we're doing. And those are things that I think everybody's having to deal with, and it's going to affect charitable giving this year for churches. So I expect it to not get better this year. And the world's getting more expensive.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. And I think it kind of plays into, I know you spent a more of a significant time talking about part-time youth pastors this year, which I almost kind of feel like there's probably going to be more of, because churches can't afford to necessarily pay them a full-time salary. So more of us are going to have to be tent makers.
I have said many times whenever anybody's asked, I believe the rise of the hourly youth pastor is coming because salary exemption laws, especially in California, but this is New York, Florida, it's happening everywhere. You're going to see more and more hourly youth pastors, just like a store clerk or somebody else. And people are like, how can I do my job hourly? Well, you're going to do it very similar to how your kids pastor probably does, because many kids pastors are hourly. And that's because they don't have the evening activities. They don't have the same amount of overnight activities. They don't go on the mission trips. They're just there during program times to run program, and then they do their prep in office hours. You're going to see pressure from churches to have youth pastors fall into that same kind of model as wage increases continue to happen, unless charitable giving rises. I've said many times, I think it's the end of summer camp. Summer camp is going to become a dinosaur because, one, the cost of summer camp is going up. Everybody knows that. But two, it's hard to pay a youth pastor an hourly wage to go to summer camp because they're getting 18 hours of overtime every day, right? Time and a half.
Yeah.
And so you're going to see a lot of churches, and we're already seeing large churches do this. They're going to run youth conferences. We're going to bring camp to our empty campus 1 week of the summer. And we're going to bring in speakers and bands and go-karts and climbing walls. And we're going to bring summer camp to our parking lot. You're going to see the rise of that. And what that really is it's VBS, but it's for teenagers. And I think it's a great model. Great model. You cut overhead, and it sucks for the Christian camps, but like, it's a win-win-win-win-win for the churches. You can actually do a better product where people sleep in their own beds at the end of the day. It's easier on your staff, easier on your volunteers. And you get to use your big empty building. Like, that's a win for everybody. So anyway,
sure. Yeah,
we digress.
That's okay. Yeah, that's really interesting to think about. What did you guys find out about part-time when you dove into this?
Yeah, let me give you the 30,000 foot view. The average part-time youth pastor works a little under 25 hours a week, and they earn, this is nationwide, a national average of just under $15 an hour. Okay. It comes to just, it's a hair under $19,000 a year is what the average part-time youth pastor makes. 2/3 of all part-time youth pastors reported being bivocational, meaning 2/3 of them work another full-time job, and then they're a part-time youth pastor on the side. The other ones, the other third are just part-time youth pastors, and that's their kind of primary gig. They don't consider themselves bivocational. Let's see. What else can I tell you about that? Yeah, let's stop there with part-time.
Sure.
There's a whole page in the actual survey on part-time. So if you're part-time, go download the survey and check out the full page kind of data.
Cool. So I know you also dove into nights off and things like that. Mm-hmm. Was something to look at. What did you gain from that?
Yeah, and what that came from was the pandemic changed the work schedule for everybody. How many youth pastors became sound people and video editors and tech guys, and hey, you're producing church and all that. I mean, it happens to a lot of people.
Online pastors and
everything. Exactly. And so I wanted to look at hours worked and how many nights a week somebody's out for youth ministry. That was pretty interesting to me. There is, 10% of youth pastors are working more than 55 hours per week. 19 of them are doing, so 1 in 5 are working more than 45 hours per week. And another 1 in 5 are working right at 40 hours a week. Half of youth pastors are out at least 2 nights a week, but only a third are out 1 night a week. I was a high school pastor, so I only had program 1 night a week. Mm-hmm. Our junior high pastor had program at the same time. We had 2 pastors. That's rare though for churches that have youth ministries. A lot of them, hey, Tuesday nights junior high, Wednesday nights high school, or Thursday nights college, young adults, or you're required to be in a small group another night of the week. I mean, there's some people who are doing 4 or 5 nights a week away from their family doing ministry activities, and that's before they go to somebody's volleyball game or band rehearsal or whatever else kind of things that we do, staff meetings and all that kind of stuff. And the reason I put this piece in this year's survey results is if you're out there and you're like, man, I'm burning the candle on both ends, and my family misses me and I miss my family, or even not that, like you just feel like I'm working too much, that section might help you have a conversation with your boss to say, hey, I'm paid as an average youth pastor, but I have an above average workload. Like, that's a kind of statement that you can start a conversation with. And that's why I want to put it in there this year.
Yeah, that's so important. Yeah, I think and if I think on top of that, you probably need, like, I need someone like that. And my wife has been that person for me to remind me, hey, you can't be out that many nights a week. If you are, then you need to have those conversations and make sure things change. So I would say on top of this data, make sure that you have someone in your life that can back you up on that and make sure that they're holding you accountable, because it's hard to survive if you're burning the candle at both ends, like you said.
It's really difficult to use that do not disturb thing on the iPhone. But I'll tell you what, man, unless it's the Super Bowl, I say the Super Bowl for youth pastors is like week before camp, week before a mission trip. Unless it's the Super Bowl, when you're home, be home.
Yep.
Like if somebody gets in a car accident, or you get called to the hospital in the middle of the night, the church will get a hold of you. Somebody will get a hold of you. You don't have to have your phone on just in case. It's not how those days are gone. They really are.
Yep. Totally. So you dove into some big factors that are affecting the compensation. What are some of those?
this is the meat and potatoes of the survey this year, Steve, because there's a common misconception among the youth ministry community that the two biggest factors that affect my compensation are my level of experience or my tenure and my education. We think those are the two things that affect our compensation the most. And I'm here to tell you they affect it, and we'll talk about them in a second, but they're not the biggest factors. The biggest factors that affect youth pastor compensation is size of church and general fund giving. Now, I just used some technical terms. I want to define them. General fund giving is your church's annual budget. Okay. So if you have a $1 million annual budget for your church of 500 people, okay, you will make a certain amount of money. I can pretty much guarantee it. Once you get over $1 million and over 1,000 people, compensation goes up dramatically. Qualifications don't among the youth pastor community. There are plenty of less than 5-year college graduate youth pastors working at mega churches of over 1,000 people with over $1 million budget. They are paid like 15% more than the guys and gals at smaller churches that have smaller budgets. And so if you feel like you look at the survey and you analyze your own compensation, you go, hey, I'm underpaid. Well, my first question to you is, how big's your church and what's their budget like? Because if you think you should get paid more, the answer is to probably find a bigger church, unfortunately. Because small churches, the only time they can afford to really pay a youth pastor well is when that youth pastor is the number 2 pastor. I worked at a church like this. It was we call them solo pastorate churches. And the church stretched their budget to hire a second pastor. That was me. I was the youth pastor. I was the worship pastor. I was the tech pastor. I was the associate on call for hospital pastor. I did everything, but my main priority was youth group, quote unquote. And those churches typically pay their second pastor a little bit more, but even still, you're not getting close to the niche roles that some larger churches that are running 10 plus staff members are going to pay. So those are the two biggest factors. And I get very technical in the survey results on like where the breaking points are for that. My friend Aaron Hill from churchsalary.com actually used some of their next level analytic tools and figured out that the breaking point for churches is precisely 411 people in regular attendance and $816,000 of giving. After those numbers, it's like a hockey stick. The salaries go up dramatically versus they're only increasing at a slow rate up until those numbers. And so his conclusion is the fastest way to get a raise at a small church is to add families to the church. Don't you have to grow your church past that magic 411 person number. I rounded it. I found the biggest number was at 1,000 is where the increases became real substantial. But anyway, kind of interesting stuff.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So I think that's kind of a hard stat though, like at the same time to hear that, like if you feel like you're not called to go to a big church, but you're still struggling, like that may be a really tough place to be in.
Well, and it's a classic problem, right? Because there's the haves and the have-nots, and the larger churches have more fat that they can trim when they need to trim it. And the smaller churches don't. And that's, Rick Warren's famous for saying many types of churches for many types of people, but the Barna study from several years ago that said 1 in 5 American churches is going to close their doors in the next 5 years. COVID put accelerant on that. I mean, I can think of a church up the street from us here in California who has taken over, quote unquote, 2 abandoned church campuses that are local to us in the last year. And they're calling them multi-site satellites and things like that. That was a church that couldn't make it and closed. And so the reality is that's happening everywhere. Because bills are going up, but giving's not keeping up. And it's a reality that churches are going to have to wrestle through. And the churches that are larger, that have staff members, for instance, if you're a church with a $5 million budget, you probably have somebody on your staff whose job it is to generate generosity. I mean, it's their job to meet with people who are looking to make large donations. That's how you get building campaigns done, all that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting phase in the history of the church that we're in right now. It really is.
For sure. And so you said the education and tenure don't play a huge role. They're not the main factors, but there still are a role. What kind of role are they playing?
Yeah. And this is not new information. I have said for years now that education and tenure, so like stay in school and stay in one spot, they will serve you well in the long run. The numbers are a little bit, especially for people who are like, hey, maybe I'll go into youth ministry as an 18-year-old high school kid. 80, what is the number? I don't want to give the wrong number. 87.2% of all youth pastors, that's among both full-time and part-time, have completed at least a college degree. 9 out of 10 youth pastors have a degree. Okay. That is not the stat that it was 10 or 15 years ago. Like it was not a requirement for many churches for you to have a degree. And what churches have found is that it is now. It is a requirement. So that's crazy to me. What's even more, this is not like are working towards a degree at junior college while they're working full time. This is people who have a degree finished. 33% of all youth pastors have finished their master's. We'll talk about competitive space, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a master's degree and 5 years of experience, you're not going to be sorry, I'm saying it this way. You're probably not going to be compensated super well. Because you're not considered an above average qualified youth pastor. I'm not talking about your skill set right now, right? Natural gifting is its own cup of tea, right?
Sure.
But just in terms of what the data points to, it's hard to be a high paid youth pastor if you don't have a master's and some experience.
That's interesting.
So if you're 26, 27, and you're married and how about this? You start at 25 years old and you're single. You've got your college degree. You get married and you have a kid and you try and buy a house by the time you're 30. You've only been in youth ministry for 5 more years. Your salary is not going to keep up with those changes in your life. It is not. It's just not. And that's why so many youth pastors have left youth ministry or they've taken a job down the street at a bigger church. Because that's the only way to get paid some of the time, unfortunately. And churches the pendulum has swung to, we can't afford to do anything but pay that youth pastor. It's going to swing back though, because the job market is changing rapidly. A church of 150 people used to be able to put out their youth director job description, and they were making $35,000 a year, and they'd get 50 applicants on churchstaffing.com. It's not that way anymore. The market is a candidate's market. And so churches are realizing now, if I have a candidate, this is true for youth and children's pastors, especially, and worship pastors. If I have a candidate who I like, it is going to be so much easier for me as a church to keep them by paying them more than it is to even overpaying them, quote unquote, than it is going to be to try and replace them at the rate that they're being paid right now. Churches are starting to realize that because they're doing searches and they're going, holy smokes, we've had this job posted for 6 months and we've had 6 people from Africa apply for it and 4 other people, and none of them were qualified. Why did we let this other person go over $5 or $6 grand? We should have found the money. People are starting to learn that reality, and it's going to swing the pendulum back. So I think that those small church pastors are going to, if the position's not going to get eliminated, they're going to get paid soon, but it's a slow swinging pendulum. So
that's good. Yeah. Cause I remember, I think in previous conversations, that was one of the things that I think we talked about is, if you're in that place, one of those, those determining factors, you could talk to your, elders or whoever you're talking to around salary is that, do you like consider the fact that like bringing someone in is going to cost a whole lot more than keeping me and just raising my wage to what I should be, getting paid in order to actually live here.
And that assumes that you're good at your job, right? If you're not good at your job, all this goes out the window. But if you're doing a good job as a youth pastor or any other pastor for that matter, and money is the thing that might be driving you away, every church right now needs to hear what I'm saying. You got to find the bucks to keep that person. I consulted for a church down the street here from me, and they asked me, what would you do with our staffing? I said, the first thing I'd do is I would lock up your kids pastor, because that person's a rock star and they're hard to find right now. Like, do what you got to do to keep them. Oh, you don't like that they don't have a college degree? Pay for them to go get one. Like, figure it out, because that's the reality right now. College degrees, I'll give quick stats on this. College degrees are worth 16% more than high school diplomas. Master's degrees are worth another 10%. but the numbers are shrinking. College degrees are catching up to master's degrees because wage increase is happening universally. Doesn't matter what your qualifications are. So whereas 5 or 10 years ago, your master's degree would have been worth 12 to 15% more than a college degree. Now it's only worth 10% more. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. So I know it's not just the salary. Benefits is a huge difference as well. What'd you find out on benefits?
I've taken data on benefits every year in the survey, but I've never published any of it because the value of benefits is so individualized and random. It depends on how many kids you have in your family. Are you married? Are you not? Churches have different denominations and different rules. So what I did this year was I published a list of benefits and what percentage of youth pastors get those benefits. Okay. So that's helpful. But what I really did this year that I did differently than any other year is I left a fill in the blank spot to ask about your church's maternity/paternity leave policies. I said, if your church does or doesn't have a policy, tell me about it here. And I had 200 and something responses of people who took the time to write out about their experience with maternity and paternity leave. And I read every single one. Some of them made me want to cry. We had our baby on Monday and I had to run youth group on Wednesday type stuff.
Wow.
I mean, unbelievable things. This person got to bring their kid to work for years because they were working at the front desk, but nobody would let me bring my kid to work because I'm a pastor or I'm a youth coordinator and it's not a spot for a baby to be. And I mean, just all kinds of terrible horror stories. And here's what they amount to. A lot of churches don't have a written in their employee handbook. A lot of churches don't have an employee handbook. We'll start there. But a lot of churches don't have a written policy for paid family leave in their employee handbooks. And the ones that they do are archaic, meaning they were written for a different day and age. Maybe it's 40 or 50 years ago when the church was started and your employees were all single income households and mom didn't have to go to work. Not like times have changed, right?
Yep.
But the policies haven't. And so a lot of churches now have some form of, and this is backed up by people's comments, some variation of my wife and I found, or me and my spouse found out that we're pregnant. I'll make this neutral on the gender, right? Because it doesn't matter if you're a male or a female youth pastor. We found out we were pregnant. I went and talked to the senior pastor. Senior pastor said, take some time, whatever you think you need. Some version of that, right? And what that does is it creates disparity among employees, for one, because it's nothing official. So this person over here takes off a month, right? And this person over here takes off 2 weeks. And this person over here has to be back at work after a week. And this person over here has worked for the church for 5 years and they got a bunch of sick time banked up and they can use that. And it creates this disparity of, and then by the way, this kid over here was born and had to stay in the NICU for a month and a half. And so the church decided, the elders voted to be generous, quote unquote. And so that person got a month and a half of paid time off, but I had to come back to work, even though, like, you see where it gets really sticky and ugly. Yeah. And so what I encourage pastors to do, and youth pastors, what I would encourage you to do is to start this conversation with your elder board or your senior pastor if it's a reality. But what I encourage executive pastors, senior pastors, and elder boards to do is to have a more than generous written family leave policy. And don't just cover birth, cover adoption, foster care, cover funerals and deaths in family with it, and medical care for parents. Because what a lot of people don't realize is if you're a licensed, ordained, commissioned minister, meaning you get a housing allowance, which is most of your listeners, I'm guessing, Steve, you don't qualify for all of the government programs that are associated with disability, with FMLA, all these other things, right? You're not entitled to anything because your compensation is clergy compensation.
Right.
And so churches have to put in policies so that the secretary, doesn't get treated differently just because they qualify for all these government programs because they're not clergy. It's really helpful. So here's what I tell churches. have a generous policy where give them a month paid that
Mhm.
doesn't count against their vacation, doesn't count against their sick time. Like just give it to them as a gift, because every church would say we value and care for families.
Yeah.
But when it comes to our employees' families,
Yeah.
we really don't, because we need them to get here and run youth group.
Yeah.
And I'm calling the bluff on that and saying, listen, Linda, like if you really care about your employees' families, give them that bonding time, whether they're a male youth pastor or a female youth pastor. Kick them out of the office for a month, tell them to turn off their email, turn off their cell phone, and spend time with their newborn baby. Because, and I have links to data in the survey saying you only get one shot at having a 1 month old.
Yep.
And those weeks and days are precious for bonding and the long-term effects they have on children. There's data scientifically to back it up. So if you really love families, go out of your way to be more than generous. Because here's the bottom line. In 99 out of 100 cases, it doesn't cost the church anything extra.
Right.
Those are payroll dollars that you're going to pay them, whether they're going to do it or not. Find a few volunteers to run youth group and call it a day.
Yep.
You know?
Totally.
So I'm a huge fan of that. I'm advocating for it loudly. I have publications coming out in several different places to champion this cause, because I think especially Gen Z employees are really concerned with this. And so if your church is going to be hiring top talent in the next 5 to 10 years, that it's going to be Gen Z employees, they're going to be asking you during the interview process about your maternity and paternity benefits, because they're planning on starting families.
Yep.
And benefits are king right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. I was talking to a business owner several years ago, and he was just giving me some tips. Not that I was trying to run a business, but he's just very generous with tips and things like that, and really good at what he did. And he was saying one of the biggest things that he can do, and he was hoping to influence the church in this way too, is to be able to increase benefits, especially those that don't even cost the church any money, like paternity leave, maternity leave, and things like that, because all of a sudden you make that employee so much happier. You're increasing their quality of life, all those different things. And it didn't cost the church very much money at all, or maybe nothing at all, in order to make that happen. And they're going to be such a much of a better employee because of that, because they know the church cares for them.
Sabbatical is another one.
Yeah.
Churches that don't provide sabbaticals for their youth pastors, it's a recipe for burnout. Give them a summer off. Take the kids to summer camp and take the rest of the summer off. Come back at school. Like, don't change their pay. Like, you don't have to do any of that. The other one I say, because this is usually a light item in a lot of churches' budgets, computers. Youth pastors now are producing their own media, and the bottleneck oftentimes is their hardware. Go buy your youth pastor a $2,000 MacBook Pro that'll last them 5 years easily, and they will be stoked to have a new toy.
Totally.
Totally. Like, they will be stoked, and they will feel so loved and so cared for. Like, that buys you so much equity, and it's in the budget normally.
Yep.
There you go.
So let's talk about wage gaps.
Okay.
I know one of the coolest things that I saw, like, is that the wage gap between male and female, at least, is shrinking. It's getting closer. It's not where it needs to be yet, but
let me explain that, Steve. Let me explain that specific statement. The wage gap is shrinking. I have data the last several years that substantiates that men and women who are entering the pastorate, meaning less than 3 years of experience, are being paid apples to apples very similarly. The gap is very close, within a couple percentage points. Where it's not getting better is with women who are already in youth ministry, and maybe they've got 10 years experience, and they are being paid significantly, like 15 to 20% less than their male counterparts. And they're not any less qualified in terms of tenure and education. And so hopefully this survey, if you're in that boat where you're like, hey, I've been in ministry over 3 years, I'm a woman, this information is something you can take to your board and say, hey, I'm not being paid market value if you take gender out of the equation. The other piece of it that is a little bit disheartening is some of the denominational bodies that are the most egalitarian. I'm talking to you, Methodists. You are the biggest champion for women in ministry, but you don't pay your women very well. And so it's like a little bit like catch-22, like, yeah, we want female pastors, but we're not going to pay them very well. It's kind of weird. Now, I will say the Presbyterians, apples to apples, traditionally in my data, pay you wouldn't know what their gender is. It's close. It's very, like, one year it was within like $100, I think.
Wow.
The average between male and female Presbyterian youth pastors, or youth directors, because most of them are not ordained, commissioned. So there's a whole little chart in the survey that kind of goes through the denominations that we ask about that have the most correspondences, or the most responses, and it just lists the gaps, and gives up an opportunity for churches to see that and go, you know what, do we want to stand in that gap? And I don't much care where you fall on the theological debate, egalitarian versus complementarian, women in ministry versus no women in ministry. Because here's what I'll say. The Baptist churches that have female youth pastors pay them exceptionally. But most Baptist pastors are complementarian and they don't have female youth pastors. But there are a few that do, and those churches pay them well. So, and Baptists as a whole are paid well. So I would just say it's not a theological issue. It's not a sexuality issue. It is a livable wage issue. And the idea of, their husband is working so we can pay them less is a stigma that I denounce in the name of Jesus. You shouldn't pay somebody what you can pay them. You should pay them what they are worth. And if they don't need the money, they can give it right back to you as a charitable contribution. There you go. Take that one to the bank. And I hear that a lot from female candidates. I hear that a lot. They go, well, my husband's got a great job, so I don't really need to make that much money. And I'm like, awesome. Take all of it and give it back to them.
Give it back. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Like, if you don't need it, good. I'm all about generosity, but you don't do anybody any service. This is like I'm a big baseball fan. This is like the players union saying we have to renegotiate our labor contract because the owners are making too much money. You have to stand up for everybody else in the union, so to speak, by saying, you know what, I'm not going to take less than market value for what I'm worth.
That's good. It's good.
Yeah. It's hard to find those churches though.
Yeah. Yeah. So Dan, as we wrap up, what's some encouragements that you have for the youth workers that are listening today? Given this information, what can they do with it, and how can they, maybe increase their salary situation or speak up for themselves? What can they actually do with this?
Yeah, two big things. One, I say every year. One will be new this year. The first one is have an annual review with your superior, with your boss, and ask for a raise. Every year there is inflation. Every year your cost of life is going up. Never will it ever go down ever again. Right. And so have an annual review and bring up your salary every single year. You don't know what year somebody's going to say, hey, you know what? You've been asking for the last 3 years. We haven't done anything this year. We're going to do something. But if you don't ask, you won't get anything. Trust me. So that's the first thing. I say it every year. And yet 60% of youth pastors still don't have an annual review every year. Or I'm sorry, 40% of youth pastors don't have an annual review every year. So have an annual review and ask for a raise. That's the first point. The second one is, and this is really in the last 2 years, we've seen this shift. It is a candidate's market. If you are a youth pastor with a college degree and 3 to 5 years of full-time experience, and you're good at your job, meaning you have a reference from somebody who's saying, this is a good youth pastor, you can pretty much write your ticket right now. Anywhere in the country you want to go, there is a church that's trying to hire you. I work for chemistry staffing, and I have friends at Slingshot and Vanderbloemen. Everybody is looking for quality candidates right now. And if you're one of those candidates who's like, man, my spouse and I are ready to move anywhere in the country to go start afresh, you literally can pick where you want to go right now, because churches cannot find candidates by themselves. And so if you're a well-qualified candidate and you're in a bad situation, and you're hanging on because you love the students or you love the families or you love the church, that is admirable. But there are not a lot of happy endings to that story that I have experienced. Steve, I know you're in the same boat. You've talked to enough youth pastors who, man, I just love the kids. I can't leave the kids. The best way I was ever released from something like that was hearing it like this. By me staying, in a bad situation that's not healthy for me and for my family, I am robbing somebody else of God's ministry opportunity for them that is right for them. And I'm not going to where God's best is for me. And so you're actually stealing somebody else's blessing, and you're hosing yourself on your own blessing by staying in a bad situation because you don't want to leave the students. And ultimately, I want healthy long-term pastoral fits in every key role. You and me both know, Steve, that the best thing for a kid's health as a teenager is having a loving, caring, Christ-centered relationship with an adult. And too many of them have had that relationship severed when the youth pastor is only there 18 months. So go to somewhere healthy and be there for a long time.
Yeah,
that's my best piece of advice.
That's gold for sure. Well, Dan, I know people are going to want to follow up with you, check out the compensation survey and the results and everything. What's the best place to find you and also find those results?
Yeah. So we definitely will link in the show notes, but you can find it at chemistrystaffing.com. It's a free download. We have several free downloads in addition to this one that might be helpful for you, as well as our blog. There's a lot of good things to think about as an employee that I write about often on our blog, chemistrystaffing.com. And then if anybody wants to talk to me, I'm always happy to chat. Housing allowances, opting out of Social Security, how do I go ask about a raise? Will you look at my resume? All that kind of stuff. I have conversations at least once a week with people all over the nation, helping them with that kind of stuff. You can email me directly, dan.navarra, Navarra at chemistrystaffing.com, dan.navarra at chemistrystaffing.com. I would love to jump on a Zoom call and just be an encouragement to anybody who feels like they don't have anybody to talk to.
Cool. Well, Dan, thanks so much for being on the podcast again today. And thanks for all that you do for not only for the youth ministry world, but ministry world as a whole. All the compensation stuff and all the tax and finance stuff. We all have questions because hardly any of us are experts. And it's great to have someone that we can always call upon and say, hey, Dan, how do I do this thing? Or what's this tax law all about? So God bless all that you do for the kingdom.
Hey man, I'm just hope that it helps people stay in ministry. That's my end game. So, the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. And so
Absolutely.
if I can help one worker say, you know what, I'm not going to go pack boxes at Amazon or drive for UPS, I'm a fan. So Thanks for having me, Steve. I'm happy to do it anytime.
Well, I hope you really enjoyed this conversation with Dan. I always love talking to Dan because I learned so much around this area that I think a lot of us maybe have some fear around talking around, but we need to, because if we're going to stay in this for the long haul, we need to be able to advocate for ourselves. And Dan actually provides the information that allows us to have some ground to stand on instead of just asking for something from our church. We actually have some stats and some research to back up why we should be asking for certain things. And so make sure you check out all the links in the podcast notes, the show notes, to be able to check out all of that information, that research, and get a hold of Dan if you have any further questions. Dan's also a fantastic person to talk to if you have any questions around ministry taxes, because there's so much of that crazy world that I think a lot of us don't quite understand. Dan is an expert in that. So be sure to get a hold of him anytime you have a question around taxes in ministry. Also, we want to thank our sponsor of this episode once again. G Shades is a fantastic youth ministry curriculum. Be sure to check out gshades.org. That's GSHADES.org and use the promo code TSMPOD to save 10% off your order. Thank you so much, G Shades, for sponsoring this episode of the Student Ministry Podcast. We're going to be back next time with a great conversation. I'm so looking forward to hearing this one as well. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you share this with other youth pastors and other youth workers that need to hear these conversations. And we'll see you next time. And as always, may God bless your ministry.